Trump is absolutely terrible.
This comes as there is new polling showing that many voters are not as happy as the president.
Trump promised X, and we're not getting X. She is acknowledging it's a disaster out there.
Donald Trump is in absolute chaos as his own voters are backstabbing him after knowing his reality. What's happening to Trump right now is measurable, it's visible, and it's deeply personal to his political identity. The president is now openly saying, "I'm very proud of the economy." But here's the problem. A growing number of voters are looking at their own lives and they are saying, "That's not what we are feeling."
What's his net approval rating with him? He is underwater by 9 points. That's a 23-point switcheroo with his base of non-college voters. He is absolutely collapsing with the group of voters that helped put him into the White House, Kate.
That gap between what Trump is celebrating and what voters are experiencing is where the real conflict starts. Because when a president declares a victory while millions of people feel squeezed, frustrated, and left behind, it doesn't land as confidence, it lands as tone deaf. And that's how you get a political betrayal in real time. Not from Democrats, not from the media, from his own voters.
And Donald Trump parading around the world saying, I solved this conflict and I solved that conflict. Solving conflicts is great. A bunch of them Trump is simply lying about, like the one between Albania and Azerbaijan.
Trump is standing at the podium talking about strong GDP numbers and market records. Meanwhile, polling shows that a majority of Americans say his policies made the economy worse. A CNN survey found that 55% of Americans believe Trump's policies hurts the economy. Only 32% say they helped. That's not a messaging problem. That's a reality problem, and it creates a dangerous emotional split. Trump says things are great. Voters, on the other hand, they say that their wallets disagree.
80% of the evangelical Christian people were lied to, if you really want to know the truth, and that's exactly what happened. They said criminal, and I believe criminals need to be off the street.
And nowhere is that split more damaging than with the very group that built Trump's political power in the first place. Trump didn't rise to the White House on suburban elites or college campuses. He built his victories among voters without college degrees. That was his backbone. That was his wall. And in 2024, he won those non-college voters by 14 points. That group didn't just support him, they carried him.
Mr. Brown, it's my understanding you also voted for President Trump.
Yes, sir.
Now fast forward to 2026, that same group now gives Trump a net approval rating that's 9 points underwater. That's a 23-point swing against the very people who put him in office. That is not a normal political shift. That is a collapse. That's not losing a few independents, that's losing your base.
What are the hard numbers on this?
Yeah, okay. One of the reasons why Donald Trump has been able to bring non-college voters into the Republican ranks is because he said, hey, I'm going to bring back those jobs, those manufacturing jobs that were lost to free trade, right? Bring in those tariffs, restrict those jobs from moving overseas.
And when a politician starts losing the people who once believed in him emotionally, not just politically, that cuts deeper than any attack ad ever could. Because this isn't about a party loyalty at the moment, it's about broken expectations.
4 points. When you can count it on one hand, you know that you're in trouble if you're Donald John Trump and the Republican Party, in this case, the Republican Party, when it comes to the voters in Congress. And of course, a 4-point lead among non-college voters is not anywhere close to being good enough because Democrats are dominating.
One of Trump's biggest promises to those voters was simple and powerful. Bring back American manufacturing, protect blue-collar jobs, use tariffs, stop jobs from being shipped overseas. That message was identity. But the numbers now? Well, unfortunately, the numbers right now tell a different story. Since January of 2025, manufacturing jobs have been down by about 63,000. That's not a rebound. That's not a comeback. That's a retreat. And declines accelerated after major policy movements intended to protect those jobs.
At this point, the Democratic base with college voters is rising, and the Republican base with non-college voters is collapsing.
So when Trump talks about victories, a lot of his own voters are looking at closed plants, reduced hours, or friends who still can't find steady work. That's where the betrayal feeling starts. Not because they hate Trump, but because they believed him. And belief turning into disappointment is one of the most powerful forces in politics. That's also why the economic reality gap is becoming so dangerous for him.
How about those manufacturing jobs? In December of 2025, compared to the beginning of the Donald Trump presidency, the manufacturing jobs have gone adios amigos. See you later. They've been going away, down 63,000 versus January of 2025, with an even larger collapse since Liberation Day, right?
Trump is out there talking about 5.6% GDP growth. He's bragging about the Dow hitting 50,000. He's even predicting the Dow could hit 100,000 by the end of his term. That kind of talk sounds great on Wall Street, but most Americans don't live off of stock market charts. They live off paychecks, rent, groceries, gas, and credit card bills.
So what we're dealing with is a Donald Trump message that is not actually meeting the reality, and that is why non-college voters have been going away from the President of the United States.
Government data shows mixed economic signals. Growth isn't as high as Trump claims. And more importantly, people don't feel richer. They feel stretched. They feel behind. You can tell people the economy is booming all day. If their bills keep rising faster than their pay, they're not going to buy it. That's how loyalists start turning into regret voters. What makes this more dangerous for Trump is not just that he is losing support. It is where that loss is spreading. It is moving straight into Congress. That is where Republicans are starting to panic quietly.
U.S. economic conditions, 32% said that they had improved them. 13% said that there were no effect. Now, how the president reconciles those viewpoints with his view of how the economy is doing.
Not long ago, Republicans dominated non-college voters. In 2024, they were winning that group by about 13 points. That was their safety net. That was their political oxygen. Now that the margin is down to around 4 points, that is not a strength. That is barely hanging on.
Oh, I'd say we're there now. I'm very proud of it, 5.6%. You know, we have a GDP of 5.6 despite a shutdown. We had a 42-day shutdown. They call it the Democrat shutdown. And because of that, I lost 1.5 points. I would have been at a 7 GDP, which hasn't been seen, I don't know, ever maybe.
At the same time, Democrats are dominating college-educated voters by around 20 points. So here's the reality. Republicans are losing ground with non-college voters, and they are not replacing that support anywhere else. One base is shrinking. No new base is filling the gap. That is not a temporary dip. That is structural damage. This is how parties lose power before election day even arrives. Now, add the issue that is driving the most anger: the cost of living. Not culture wars, not slogans, not rallies, money, rent, food, gas, and bills. That is what voters actually care about.
And he believes almost all of it has gone to China over the years. But with President Trump's tariff war, China is no longer buying U.S. soybeans. Income has plunged 20% on this farm over the last year because of that.
Exit polls and surveys keep showing the same thing. Affordability is the top issue. People are not interested by stock market headlines. They are staring at grocery receipts. They are watching rents climb constantly. They are watching their paycheck disappear faster every single month.
When you're operating on margins of less than single-digit percentage margins, 20% is very devastating. I don't know of any business out there, any businessman out there would keep his doors open, where he would have to take his own equity out of his own
That's what you're doing?
Yes, the farm's using the equity it's built up over the years just to survive.
And when voters say that Trump does not meet them where they are, he calls it a con job. He calls it a scam. He says Democrats are lying about affordability. That is a political mistake. You cannot tell people who are struggling that their pain is fake. You cannot gaslight someone who just paid more for less at the store. That is how you lose trust fast. This is also why immigration is no longer saving him. Approval of immigration is down to around 38%. That is not a political strength. That is a weakness. ICE crackdowns that once fired up the base now make many working class and moderate voters pretty uneasy.
Yeah, and it is striking just to hear him now take ownership of the economy after spending most of last year laying the blame directly on Joe Biden. You know, he even said at one point that he would take credit for the good parts, but that the bad parts were Biden's fault.
Not because they suddenly changed their values, because immigration does not pay the bills. Border speeches does not lower the rent. Tough talk does not cut grocery store prices. Economic pain drags every conversation back to the same place. Why is my life more expensive now? That shift is deadly for Trump. For years, he could change the subject and keep his base energized. Now the economy keeps pulling the conversation back to reality. And reality is not helping him right now.
For the last quarter of last year, because of that government shutdown, estimates have been much lower, although one estimate from the Atlanta Fed put the rate at 5.4%. So that could be perhaps what the president is pointing to there.
Then there is the emotional pressure on Trump himself. There is no verified clip of him saying his voters backstabbed him. That moment does not exist, but the anger is visible. The frustration is obvious.
The president says is the state of the economy, and what most Americans feel is the state of the economy. You know, a CNN survey last month found that 55% of Americans said that President Trump's policies had worsened.
Listen to his speeches, watch his social media. The tone is sharper, the defensiveness is stronger, the blame on Democrats is constant. He keeps returning to grievances about election losses and shutdowns. That does not sound like confidence. That sounds like a leader under pressure. Voters, they feel that. They may not use political language all the time, but they sense instability. They sense irritation. They sense someone reacting instead of leading. That perception matters. It becomes part of the story whether Trump likes it or not.
That he will be hitting the road with this economic message. They at one point said that he would be out once a week, although so far he's only done 2 of these trips, and both of those speeches sort of veered off in multiple different directions.
Experts are already saying that kind of growth would require extreme conditions. It is not normal, it is not likely, and when a president ties himself to markets this closely, he also owns every downturn, every correction, every bad week.
That the president used there don't comport with what the government have put out. The president saying that GDP was at 5.6%. You know, the last reading that we got, which was for the third quarter of last year, showed that annualized growth was at 4.4%.
When the market goes up, he takes the credit. When it goes down, voters will blame him. That raises the stakes dramatically. At the same time, the emotional core of Trump's movement is cracking. His power was never just about policy. It was about loyalty. It was about identity. And it was about believing that he was fighting for you. Economic pain changes that. Loyalty becomes conditional. Support becomes transactional. Voters stop asking who they like. They start asking who is helping them to survive. From Trump's perspective, that feels like betrayal. From the voters' perspective, it feels like reality. That emotional gap is brutal. Trump still treats his movement like it's a family, and families hurt the most when loyalty begins to fade. Now take all of this and put it inside a midterm pressure cooker. The White House is saying openly that the economy will decide these elections. Trump is hitting the road with economic messaging, but his speeches keep drifting back to grievances, not solutions, complaints, not relief. The State of the Union is being framed as a make or break moment. Every bad poll tightens the pressure. Every weak number adds fuel. Every sign of base erosion feels personal, and stepping back right now, this is bigger than Trump. With slow erosion, that suddenly becomes impossible to deny. And right now, Trump is not just fighting Democrats, he is fighting the slow collapse of loyalty from his own people.